It all began on a chilly morning in the small coastal town of Ashford Bay. Officers Grant Foster and Eric Dalton were on their usual patrol, cruising the narrow streets lined with old brick buildings and storefronts. They'd worked this beat for nearly a decade. They knew the neighborhood, the faces, the routines. It wasn't a high-crime area, just the kind of place where they felt their presence maintained order. At least that's what they told themselves. "Quiet day," Grant muttered, tapping the steering wheel as their patrol car rolled down Ocean View Lane. Eric, sipping lukewarm coffee, nodded. "Too quiet." As they turned a corner, they spotted an elderly man sitting on a bench outside a seaside cafe. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a weathered coat, his hands cradling a steaming mug. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, lost in thought. Something about the scene made both officers uneasy. Grant slowed the car. "See that guy? He doesn't look like he's from around here." Eric squinted. "Yeah, let's check it out." The patrol car pulled to the curb. As the officers stepped out, their boots clunked heavily against the damp pavement. The elderly man turned his head slightly, his expression calm and unbothered by their approach. "Good morning, officers," he said, his voice steady, with a hint of warmth. "Morning," Grant replied curtly. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" The man raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm enjoying my coffee. Is that against the law in Ashford Bay?" Eric stepped closer, his demeanor sharpening. "Got some ID on you?" Without hesitation, the man reached into his pocket, moving slowly and deliberately. The officers exchanged a glance, their suspicion deepening. "Hurry it up," Grant snapped, his tone impatient. The man paused, his movements freezing. "Why the rush, officer? I'm just sitting here, minding my business." "You don't ask questions," Eric barked. "You follow orders." A tense silence hung in the air. The man sighed and withdrew his wallet, handing over his ID without a word. But by then, the officer's patience had worn thin. "Stand up," Grant ordered, grabbing the man by the arm. "Hands behind your back." The man's calm demeanor didn't waver. "What's the charge?" "Disorderly conduct. Resisting arrest," Grant muttered as Eric cuffed his wrists. The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Resisting? I haven't even stood up yet." But the officers weren't listening. To them, it was just another arrest, another routine. Back at the station, the man's name was entered into the system. Malcolm Carter. No criminal record, no signs of trouble. Just a quiet man who'd been sitting at a cafe. But Grant and Eric didn't bother with those details. They filed their report and moved on. "Another one for the books," Eric said as he dropped the paperwork onto the sergeant's desk. Grant shrugged. "You can never be too careful these days." Days later, the officers received a court summons. They were to testify regarding Malcolm Carter's arrest. It was routine. They expected nothing unusual. But as they walked into the courthouse, something felt off. Whispers filled the hallway, and curious eyes followed them as they made their way to the courtroom. Inside, the murmur of the crowd died instantly. Seated at the judge's bench was none other than Malcolm Carter, now wearing the black robe of a magistrate. Judge Malcolm Carter. Grant froze mid-step. Eric's face turned pale. They exchanged a panicked glance. The judge's gaze was steady as he addressed the court. "Good morning. Let's proceed." As the hearing began, Judge Carter wasted no time. He looked over the officer's report, his expression unreadable. "According to this, the arrest was made for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Officers, would you care to elaborate?" Grant cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "Your Honor, the suspect was acting suspiciously." Judge Carter raised an eyebrow. "Suspiciously? Sitting on a bench drinking coffee is suspicious behavior in Ashford Bay?" Eric's mouth opened, but no words came out. Judge Carter leaned forward. "Did he refuse to show his ID?" Grant hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but he wasn't quick about it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Carter's gaze didn't waver. "So you arrested a man for sitting on a bench, drinking coffee, and not handing over his ID fast enough?" The officers fidgeted in their seats as the judge's pointed questions continued. Every flaw in their report, every inconsistency in their story was laid bare. It became clear to everyone present that the arrest had nothing to do with maintaining law and order. Judge Carter paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "Officers, I want to understand something. At any point, did Mr. Carter exhibit aggression or behavior that could be deemed a threat? Grant shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. He was calm. Calm, Judge Carter repeated, his voice steady. And yet you escalated the situation to an arrest. What was it about Mr. Carter's demeanor that justified this escalation? Eric interjected, his voice barely above a whisper. We were just following protocol. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. Protocol? I'm curious. Is there a protocol that mandates arresting someone who complies but does so at a pace you find inconvenient? The courtroom was silent, save for the faint scratching of a reporter's pen against paper. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Carter leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not an isolated incident. This is a case study in how power, when unchecked, can be misused. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, and the officers' faces flushed under the growing scrutiny. Judge Carter returned his focus to the defendants. You stated in your report that Mr. Carter was resisting arrest. Explain to me exactly how he resisted. Grant stammered, He questioned our authority, Your Honor. Questioned your authority, Judge Carter repeated, his tone now icy. Officers, do you believe that questioning authority is equivalent to resisting arrest? Or is it a fundamental right in a democracy to seek clarity about actions taken against oneself? Eric looked at the floor, his voice cracking. We didn't think it would come to this. The judge's gaze bore into them. You didn't think. That, officers, is precisely the issue. A failure to think, to assess, to act with discernment and restraint. Instead, you chose to escalate. Why? Neither officer could respond. The silence spoke volumes. Judge Carter turned his attention to the gallery. This court isn't just here to address the actions of these officers. It is here to remind us all of the importance of accountability. Without it, the trust between law enforcement and the community erodes. The murmurs turned into nods of agreement. In the back of the courtroom, a young woman raised her hand. Judge Carter acknowledged her. Yes, ma'am. She stood, her voice firm. Your Honor, as a resident of Ashford Bay, I want to know what steps will be taken to ensure this doesn't happen again. Judge Carter smiled faintly. That is a question for the community to answer together. It starts with demanding better training, transparent oversight, and officers who see themselves as part of the community, not apart from it. The young woman nodded, her expression resolute. Judge Carter looked back at the officers, his tone softening slightly. Officers, this isn't about ruining your careers. It's about ensuring that you and others learn from this. The badge you wear is not a shield from accountability, but a symbol of service and humility. Remember that. With that, Judge Carter closed the session for the day, leaving the courtroom buzzing with conversation. As the officers stood to leave, they avoided the eyes of the crowd, their usual confidence now replaced by a quiet understanding of the gravity of their actions. The truth had unfolded, and it left no place to hide. When the hearing concluded, Judge Carter's final statement resonated through the courtroom. The charges against me were baseless. The actions of these officers were unjustified. This is not merely about one incident. It is about accountability and the systemic issues that allow such actions to occur. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. As officers of the law, you are entrusted with upholding justice. Today, you failed in that duty. Therefore, I am recommending disciplinary action. The room was silent. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, holding signs reading, Justice for all and end profiling now. Reporters swarmed Judge Carter as he exited. Judge Carter, how do you feel about the outcome? One reporter asked. He gave a measured smile. I feel hopeful. Today, accountability was served. Let this be a reminder that justice must be impartial and compassionate. No one is above accountability, not even those sworn to protect and serve. As cameras flashed, Judge Carter's gaze drifted to the diverse crowd on the courthouse steps. For him, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a step forward in the fight for equality and justice. Because sometimes justice takes unexpected forms, and sometimes it comes full circle.